And now we have AI, right? So you could literally, if you're, nefarious, you could train AI and all these techniques and robocall people and put them on the phone and start doing all this kind of stuff. So I'm very, very concerned for our elder population, because that is really, they've worked their whole lives for all their assets. And many of those people I've worked with for decades. So I see them and I know what they did. I know they've attained great wealth, but they worked for it. They, it just didn't happen to them. And so I don't think it's right that they are losing these assets at a record rate now. And I think we need to do that as various professions, especially wealth management, others that deal with financial services, and to connect to them, whether it's caregivers, anybody who connects with people when they're older needs to be aware that you should be protecting them.
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. My guest today is Kurt Baker. Kurt, you and I met, it's almost a year now. We met because as founders, we are really trying to uncover what the whole digital piece is. You're in the financial wealth management. So welcome, and tell us more about your story and how you got here.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it very much. And thanks for having me on the show. I got to the digital side really from the traditional side, because I've been dealing with finances and money for, 40, 50 years now with the various facets. And now it's getting easier to access money, but also easier for others to access your funds. So this became a big concern of mine several years ago. I would say the first time it really was kind of brought to focus for me is my father was telling me a story about a really good friend of his. He was an aerospace engineer, literally a rocket scientist. So his friends, they were pretty intelligent engineers as well, and he had retired and moved to Tampa and was having a nice life and was getting his all his care taken care of and so forth. And then my father found out that one day somebody had liquidated and transferred out of the country all of his assets. So he went from being very comfortable living in a nice facility to having to transfer out of his facility where he was living and on Medicaid. So he went from being comfortable to being impoverished within a relatively short period of time. And this isn't the only story out there. There's many others that I had heard even before that. But this is when it really comes even more real when you know a personal story, you know who that person is, that it's so easy for these the scammers to do what they do, that it's a pretty scary. And now with the digital age, it's getting even worse, and that's the problem. It's becoming much more sophisticated now. We have AI. That's a powerful tool. In a positive direction, it's also a powerful tool, and in the negative side of it as well. And then to follow up with that, another incident's happened to my father might have been a year or two after I found that out, that I was sitting at home and my father calls me up and says that he's got somebody on the phone that says that my daughter is in trouble and that he needs to transfer them. I don't remember the amount, but it was, I don't know, 5 or 10,000, maybe 50.
Oh
I don't
my
remember.
God.
It was a decent amount of money to get her bailed out of this situation. And my daughter is sitting on the couch across from me. I'm looking at her. She's like less than 6 feet away from me. And even though I told him that she was sitting there in the room with me, the scammer was so good, because you have the person actually conducting the phone call, and then you have this woman or this young woman yelling and screaming and panicking in the background and adding all this emotion. And my father was 100% cognitively fine. However, he was older, and our response time slows a little bit. And our emotional connection is very, very strong to our family in most cases. So you got that extra piece that even if you're very analytical, people that know what they're doing can work that psychological, emotional side of things. Even for somebody like my father, who was really tough to break emotionally, especially when he was younger, and even older was he softened a little bit, but still, I was like amazed. And even when my daughter got on the phone with him, it took a good 3 to 5 minutes for her to convince him that she
She
was
was
his
fine.
actual daughter. This is how hyped up they've gotten him,
How
and how
elaborate. I that
it was, yeah, and
I'm
it
kind of
must
blown away
work
by
because
it.
they did it. And now we have AI, right? So you could literally, if you're, nefarious, you could train AI and all these techniques and robocall people and put them on the phone and start doing all this kind of stuff. So I'm very, very concerned for our elder population because that is really, they've worked their whole lives for all their assets. And many of those people I've worked with for decades. So I see them and I know what they did. I know they've attained great wealth, but they worked for it. It just didn't happen to them. And so I don't think it's right that they are losing these assets at a record rate now. And I think we need to do that as various professions, especially wealth management, others that deal with financial services and to connect to them, whether it's caregivers, anybody who connects with people when they're older needs to be aware that you should be protecting them. That's kind of our job now. They've earned their place, so to speak, as the seniors, and I think we need to really take care of that population. And the way to do that is to help to organize their entire life in a way that makes sense, right? So, and this is where
It
they
protects
need to
them.
get.
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
what you're bringing out is there's a level of safeguarding and protection
Mhm.
that our seniors have. You're bringing out an amazing point that I need to bring home because when I speak to older clients, 60 plus year olds, they're like, "Oh, I don't have, their digital footprint. They minimize their digital footprint." But what you're saying, they might not have an extensive social media account or a lot of pictures on their phone, but Kurt, what you're saying is from a security standpoint, even in institutional organizations, such as a wealth management, this is a serious problem.
It is absolutely. In fact, one detail I tell my clients early on is that, as an example, when you should sign into your your social security account, right? Because you have a digital access now to this information, and you need, not because you necessarily need that information, but you want to make sure somebody else doesn't authenticate in and capture that account instead of you, and maybe diverts those funds when you're at retirement at the time that it's done. So if you don't engage in this in a proactive way and kind of claim your own connections, even if they're government agencies, Social Security, Medicare, you want to go in and set up those accounts early, because now you're the one that has the password. You're the one that has the two-factor authentication. You're the one that's authenticating, and somebody else didn't come in and somehow manage. Now it's harder to do than it used to be, but it's still possible for somebody else to come in because your digital information is out there on the dark web. And as you point out, even if you're not active on social media, they do this by essentially encircling your friends and family and learning from them. And they have ways of mapping all this out and essentially determining who you are and what belongs to you. Even if you don't do anything directly yourself, that really doesn't matter so much anymore because the technology is so advanced. And again, you throw in the AI factor, and it's going to do predictive things. It's going to know better what your next steps are than you do, simply because it has the data on other people in similar situations and can basically project that whole issue. So you want to get in front of that. You want to claim your own location, your own assets themselves. You want to do the same thing with your own bank and brokerage accounts. I know many people, older people, still prefer to do things like get paper statements and all that, which is great. That's fine. I completely understand that. Personally, I think it's a lot of paperwork that comes over in the mail when you do that. In fact, I've had clients say, "I want all the paper," and then about a month later, they go, "No, no, 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 I don't want all the paper." I'll log in because all the disclosures that get said is it can be overwhelming and you get lost in all of it. But the point being that you want to go ahead and set up the account anyway, even if you have no intention of using it, every single month, because you want to be the one that has the authority to go in there, and you want to be the one that has that information. And so the next step of that really is, in my opinion, to protect those assets, especially as we get older. You can set up another person or a trusted person in your family where assets cannot be transferred unless there's some kind of process to authenticate it out. Like in my case, if somebody would like to transfer out assets out of their account, the advisor has to be involved. And what I do is I ask people, please send me some kind of written request. Usually it's an email, it could be a letter if they want it, but I want a written document that says, hey, I would like you to transfer this money. Then I initiate a call out to them on a number that I already know is theirs. And we have a conversation and I verify that that's what they want to do. And then I go ahead and put in the order once I've verified it's in writing. Because now, one, I don't want to make a mistake. I want to make sure I get the number exactly correct. And two, now I've documented it by having a conversation with them. Okay, yes, I do intend to do that. And then I put the order in. But the custodian that I work with won't transfer that money until they call me and verify that I've actually had a conversation or met with them in person, that this is their intent. So you've got a human being in the middle of it, even though you want to do everything, and this happens very quickly, so it doesn't slow this down at all, but it's protection for your client. That way the money cannot leave unless you've actually had a conversation, and then you can electronically allow it to transfer. Because if my father's friend had this in place where there was a third party that had to be contacted in order for that to occur, if there was an advisor on there that knew the person's situation, they would have questioned it and they would not have allowed it to go through and likely stop the entire process from happening, and he would not have had to gone through that at near his end of life.
I mean, this
So
is a
that's
heartbreaking story. It
it is.
and how common it is. So the digital piece here really is it's about the scams. It's about the
Correct.
increase in scams and cyber hacks. And I would think it am I wrong that they're gonna start targeting older
They already target
individuals?
older people because, like, what was it, Dillinger? Why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why do scammers go after the older population? Because that's where the assets are. They live a long life, they've accumulated assets, and that's where the majority of the money is right now. So if you're a scammer or if you're somebody trying to, pull money out of the system, illegitimately, you're going to go to the profile. They do it just like any other quote, good company would do. Who's my audience? Where's my highest
They do the
value
market
client? That kind
research.
of thing. Even though they're not clients, they're victims in this case. They look there because that's where they're likely to find someone, especially because you combine that with cognitive decline, you combine that with the fact that the longer somebody lives, the more likely they are to be left alone. So there isn't somebody to help do that. That's why you need somebody, in my opinion, you need somebody that you trust to at least do that second factor. And of course, in a worst case scenario, you want somebody who can step in as your trustee, right, or as your guardian to make those decisions on your behalf. And even when you have a guardian on your behalf, you need to have somebody else watch the guardian, right? So you never want one person to be the only fiduciary. Yes, the nefarious people are relatively small, thank goodness, but they take a lot of money out of the system. But people make errors too. So you want to make sure for multiple reasons that, especially when dealing with a large amount of money, that somebody else is involved in that conversation and in that process to get the best result, which is to take care of the person whose money it is and make sure they're cared for, they're able to be cared for, and that those assets flow to wherever they want it, whatever their legacy is, whatever their passion is, whatever they care about, whether it's their children, grandchildren, there's some cause that they're very passionate about. You want to make sure that all that happens the way that they want it to happen, not the way somebody else out there wants to transfer that money out and do something, whatever they're going to do with it, right?
So,
So,
and you're talking about, when we talk about estate planning, right? We are
yep,
talking about those crucial documents. So, a will and
yes,
trust, yes, but
correct.
so couple words. One is fiduciary. Not everybody really might understand what fiduciary is. And then also when it comes to power of attorney or durable power of attorney, maybe we can step into those two terminologies and
Sure.
documents.
Yeah, yeah. So you want to have the correct. So the estate planning, the physical structure is extremely important. This is where the attorneys, in my opinion, get involved. Even though theoretically you can go online and do all of this stuff, but if you have real assets, it's worth spending a little bit of money to have somebody do it absolutely correctly. Because just like AI, it's kind of cool and fun to get a general framework and a picture, But if it's your personal situation, at some point you're going to want to hire somebody who knows exactly how to match up what's out there with your particular situation, because you're going to get the best result. And believe me, it easily pays for itself many times over in tax efficiency, transfer the assets as efficiently as possible to the places you want it to go. That's just not going to happen unless you have somebody involved, in my opinion. So you want to make sure you have the basics in there. Now the will is really the starting point, and that is kind of like, and it's what it sounds like. It's a will, right? So you're saying, hey, this is what I would like to have happen. Doesn't necessarily mean contractually that's what's happening, but that means this is my wish and my to do that. But so that is kind of, almost like the things that are missing, right? The things that you haven't already documented or set up. So your accounts themselves, I mean, the simple thing is you set up the beneficiaries where you want the money to go. So that happens automatically, right? If you were to pass and you have beneficiaries set up on your brokerage account or checking and savings and things like that. And sometimes people don't, it's amazing how many people have not proactively done that. The industry has gotten
Why do you
better
think
at
that people don't
reminding
do
people
it?
about it.
I mean, I'm jumping
I
in,
don't
but
know because I'm shocked because I remember, like, early on in my career, I would have to literally ask my custodian, "Where do I get the beneficiary documentation so when I sign up this account, I can add the beneficiaries up front?" They go, "Oh, it was almost like it was hidden." I'm like, "Why is it not on the actual paperwork to start?" Now it is now for the most part. I think most custodians and most banks and things like that do that up front, but people have accounts that have been open for, 10, 20, 30 years. They may not have done it yet. Or there's been a life change. Maybe they were divorced, maybe they're married, maybe things happen. Maybe somebody's passed away. You want to make sure that you go back in periodically and just double check them. Make sure the things are, I mean, you certainly don't want all your assets going to your ex-spouse when your current
and
spouse is sitting in the room, right? They get
I
very
know how
upset at that kind of
common
stuff.
that is.
You definitely they will be cursing you for eternity, right? You don't want that, right? So it's a good idea to just check this stuff. I think the good news is if you do have electronic access, most of them actually put it in their portals now, so you can actually look and see who are my beneficiaries on this account. So that's the simple stuff, and then if you get more complicated, then you do things like potentially set up trusts, which is really just a contract, and it's just saying, "Hey, this is how I want my money to flow, and who I want to get it, and how I want things handled." They can get very complex, but the idea is if you understand what you want to have happen, and you're talking to you have a good legal and a financial advisor and accountant, and really those three people are kind of work together on this to make sure the tax planning is correct, make sure the financial planning is correct, make sure the legal structure is correct, and of course the individuals are involved. Once you have all of that in place, it's very straightforward for them to back into what your wishes are. Sometimes people are like, oh, this is overwhelming. It's not for a professional. You just have to understand what you want to do, and if you're not 100% sure, your advisors will help you walk through these things. Like, who's going to be my custodian? Who's going to take care of this? If I die before my children reach, 18, who's going to do all this stuff? Well, it's better that you decide, because if you don't, the state's going to have something in place that's going to be a default, and it may or may not be what you want or your children want, as an example. So it's better to take a few minutes and spend a little bit of time and do this, because the good news is when you do it, there's this it's always in the back of people's minds. Like, I should be doing this. I know I need to do this. But once you do it, this stress level just kind of drops and you don't even realize it. You're like, oh, I've got all that taken care of. I don't really have to worry about that. Now you're just kind of checking it. And it's very easy to update it, because and people will say, oh, but if I do this, what if something changes? Well,
Change
that's
it.
a very easy thing to
Change it.
do. It's very easy to amend something like that. It's usually one page time of thing. You modify the paragraph, you sign it, you're done. And it's not that complicated, especially if you have the basic structure in place. It takes a literally, an attorney or something like that, minutes to set this thing up, and then you're good to go, and keep going on forward. So that's those are just some basic things. But the digital thing is really really important, and I know you talk about a lot about this, and I think one, you want to have the access to it, but two, you want to plan for access for that next person in line, so to speak. Like, how do they access those accounts if they need to, right? And you can do it a lot of ways. Like, you can add people to accounts. You can do things like use these password
Managers,
programs now. Like, I
digital
use
vaults.
LastPass. so you can share passwords, in a restricted way, like whichever ones you want. And then, if something does happen to you, you could give them, a way to access everything if necessary, like your phone and stuff. So you could probably talk about some of that. I know that you have your legacy contacts and stuff like that, right? So you want to make sure you set all these things up now that are available because again, you don't want to get locked out of your because our phone is so important now, right? Because that's usually the two-factor authentication. Your app, it's either the phone itself texting you, or you have an authentication app on there that you may have to access. So either way, it's going to complicate things quite a bit and delay the process. If something does happen, you want to make sure that you can go ahead and move forward whatever the next steps are and not be locked out of the accounts because and my father passed away a year ago and he literally set up one account specifically as a joint account just so we could do the stuff like on day one, arrange the funeral, that kind of stuff, right? So we didn't have to wait for anything, even though it was happened pretty fast. I think within a few days we had all the beneficial stuff was transferred over. This account was set up specifically to be able to arrange the funeral, set that up, and take care of all that up front. And so we were able to like really just respond on day one
Well,
and
the fact
just
that
start to
you and your father had a good enough relationship, close
yes.
relationship, and that
Mm.
that you talking about the topic, I mean,
Oh
he
yeah.
was open to it because there are people
What?
in their 70s, 80s, and 90s that still don't wanna talk about this inevitable event,
Correct.
much less and I
Yep.
also think working maybe not your dad, but maybe with some of your clients, do you find that the older population that there's a level of secrecy and just
Yes, yes. Well, I'm
unwillingness?
gonna go back to my dad because believe me, I had no idea about anything ever. Like like you talk about he literally launched secret satellites for the government, okay? This is how quiet he was. I mean, he was doing top secret work for the government for years and he was in charge of the program. But that's the way he was with everything. So, I had no idea what our assets were. I had no idea about anything our family had or did until probably his late 60s, early 70s, he started to give us a little inkling of stuff, but nothing really solid until probably his early 70s. And this was a progression. This took years and years and years, right? And he passed at 89, just shy of 90. But by the time he got into he'd started gradually sharing information with us. And by the end, he was very open about it because of course he knew he was getting older. He knew at some point he was gonna, but see, well, he wanted to make sure
He
everything
was really
transferred.
old, he was really old, I mean, if he
But
had
when
died
you're younger, you're invincible, right? Like right now, I'm not gonna die this afternoon, right? I mean, that's the way we think because you feel good, you're healthy, all your numbers look good, all that good stuff. But I may pass away on my way trying to go home from work today. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. And so sometimes you have to really, and usually it's an event like that where you see somebody pass away, you see an instance where somebody didn't do something they were supposed to do, and you left the rest of the family. I mean, honestly, it's usually the spouse that gets kind of like, I didn't know anything about what was going on. And all of a sudden, it's all just dropped on me. And I'm literally digging to try to find out where's our money. What do we owe? I mean, they just have, and they're already stressed out because the person passed away. And then you throw on top of that, they're not even sure where they're going to find the checkbook to pay for the funeral. They just don't know.
how
And that's
painful.
horrible.
Alright,
Yeah,
so this is a real scenario. These are real situations that
absolutely.
people are we're just not talking about it.
Nope.
We need to talk about these topics. So 3 to 5 tips, like, what would you recommend if someone walked into your office and they're in their late 30s, early 40s? How would you set them up to make sure that if life happened, whether for themselves or their parents, like, what would you recommend that they do today?
Mm. Oh, well, okay. Well, first we review where they're at, obviously. So the first step is to find out what do you have in place already, and then I think the next step is I think part of it is really you need to do communication is very very important here, right? So you want to make sure that you're setting up all the legal structure so that things flow the way you want it to flow. Because just because you want something to happen doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to happen as as far as legally, right? So there's legally And sometimes you might be surprised, like, what, oh, well, they'll just transfer it to my whoever. But that may not happen. I mean, it may happen, but it may not. So why take it to chance? Get it all laid out in writing, and then involve the people that are going to be part of this. I mean, I've seen instances where they, I've heard of it, where people set up like a caregiver for like their children, and then they neglected to tell them. It's like, you know, it's like, they set up, they go, you need to tell them. Like, usually it's the spouses. Did you tell, Jim and Johnny that, they're going to take care of the kids? Oh no, I guess I better tell them. So sometimes you have to actually get their buy-in as well. So you want to make sure that you kind of got the documentation in place. You go ahead and set up everything so that somebody else can literally step in. It's kind of like being a mini business owner, right? You own your little business, which is your life, right? So you have to do you have to do kind of exit planning, I'll call it, right? This is what we do in the business world.
Off
Because you have to
offboarding,
make
I mean, right? I mean,
yeah, you
you're
have to make
offboarding your life.
sure someone else can step in
Right.
and take over all aspects of your life in the way you want to. And that's what good business owners do, right? They hire an operations manager, they hire HR person, they hire somebody to do all these different pieces. Well, as far as your personal planning goes, you want to make sure that you have somebody who can take step in for the biggies are things like your financial life. So something happens, let's say of cognitive decline, and then of course your healthcare proxy. Who's going to take care of you if you're in the hospital? It could be an auto accident and be in a coma. You want somebody who thinks the way you do as far as what actions you want to have taken as far as medically, like would this person really want this, right? Or not? And most of the time they're different for the financial person. To me, that's kind of two different mindsets, right? And then but that person may not be the right one to do the finances. So you want to make sure you have the right people in place as far as to manage things in case you're unable to at some point in life. And then you want to make sure that things are going to go to either the next generation, or many times it happens to be a cause that you care about. Like, how is that going to be set up so that you make sure you're not just handing over your money to somebody, right? Whether that's, your grandchildren, your children, or whether that is a cause you care about. You want to make sure that's being managed the way you want it to be managed. Because if you just transfer money to people, you kind of lose total control. So you might not it might not flow the way you want it to flow. And so you want to kind of think about that whole process, and then go through the steps to document it and make sure it all works from a legal standpoint, from an accounting standpoint, make sure it's done tax efficiently. That's huge. You can lose a lot of money from taxes just by not setting things up correctly in the right vehicles, and make sure that it's going to flow the way it needs to flow. And then, of course, involve all of the individuals that you might need, or entities in some cases, to act in each of those pieces, right? Who's going to take care of all these different pieces, and then who's
Those
kind of the backup?
fiduciary duties that we talked about.
Correct,
Yeah.
exactly. Who's going to take that fiduciary duty? And you mentioned the digital assets. I mean, you want to make sure that you've got things in place now that so much is online. You have a way for people to easily take over, whether using a password manager type of software, or whether you're just tracking all of your accounts and having a way for somebody to access it. They have to be able to access your phone in most cases, because everybody uses those now pretty much by default in order to access these accounts. And to the two-factor authentication is pretty much the standard now. It was an option. They're kind of forcing everybody to go into that aspect, and if it's not already, it will be soon, because that's part of the whole security issue that we have to be
Oh my
careful of.
gosh, just with
So,
the AI. So
yep.
with that, we just touched on something. Let's talk about, in the last couple minutes here,
Sure.
what happens if they don't do this? Let's talk about those unclaimed assets and
Ah,
what people
yeah,
might not be familiar with.
yeah. And so this is something I did literally when my mother passed and when my father passed. I mean, I went in, and you can go to missingmoney.com is kind of the government endorsed. I think many states have endorsed it. I don't know if it's in every state, but it's in, as far as I can tell, it seems to be in most states now. And you just go in there and you put your name in, and it'll come back and let you know whether or not there are any unclaimed assets out there. Because what happens if somebody writes you a check and you never cash the check, as an example, they can't just keep the money. They have to transfer that usually to the state government as an unclaimed asset. So I wrote you a check for $500 for some reason, and you never cash it.
And you
I,
died.
I Yeah, and the person passes away,
Right.
or not. You could be alive, and this can happen too. Either
Oh,
way,
okay.
but in any case, no, there's a time limit. I think it's like 6 months or something. There's some time limit that, like, if a corporation or a bank or somebody writes you a check, you never ever. And I think it might be longer than that, but if you never ever claim it, then they have to transfer the money to the state. They can't just keep it on their books. Okay, because it's something they owe to somebody, and literally hand it off to the state. And right now there's about $77 billion like this out there that's unclaimed, and all you need to do is literally put your information in, find out whether or not it's owed to you, or in this case, I checked for my parents, and I can put in their name because I was the executor, and then I could go in and claim it on their behalf because I'm one of the heirs as well. So I can go ahead and say, hey, um, you need to do that. So you do that with individuals, do that with yourself, your family. Just run all that. It takes a few minutes. You run all your names through that, and you'll see whether or not any assets are owed to you. But also, if there's any companies involved, like if let's say you're, I don't know, either you or your parents are like small business owners, right? You can put in the business entity's name as well and see whether or not there's some check that was written to them, maybe that they put in a drawer and forgot about, right? And then it never got cash. Then that money is still owed to that entity. So you can claim it on behalf of the entity as well, and get that money back. So it's just a simple way to go out and get money that's, $77 billion that's owed to people. And it could be, as long as you're in the line of the generational thing, you can claim it, even if it's not directly owed to you. It's owed to somebody who you would have inherited money from.
That is invaluable information that people
Yeah,
just probably are not aware of. So much that we talked
most are.
about, Kurt, today. Your expertise over the last how many decades now have you been doing this work?
Only about four.
Oh,
I started in middle school, but I don't know if I wasn't actually an expert until my 20s. So that's
well, this is
it
awesome.
took a
And
little
then
bit of time to ramp up.
if people wanted to reach out to you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Well, you can find out all about me at kurtisbaker.com, or you can just call me directly at 609-716-4700.
That's awesome. And with that, thank you again for your time and keep your password safe and your playbook up to date. All right, and we'll end here and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.